So hey dude, my man has been hounding me for a collab for weeks now. And admittedly, I have been putting it off in favor of other noble pursuits, such as pissing off the noble people of ancient Kemet by insinuating that Egypt is not a monolith of skin tones, and also by pulling a Ygritte.
You know nothing.
With regards to them and Her Highness, Queen Nefertiti. Wow, a whole 71 Egyptians got really heated. Heated enough about my video to comment all of this fucking shit. Apparently, the unknown heritage of a woman who lived 3,000 years ago is exceptionally divisive, and I kicked a hornet's nest. Oops, my bad. Woe is me. But anyway, Hey Dude has been on my case.
Yeah, because someone decided they had to go to college and be smart and do a bunch of homework.
And I was in need of something to keep me out of trouble during Black History Month. So finally, I sat down to get on to this video that he sent me that he watched and wanted to do with me. So let's keep myself out of trouble and let's talk about Black Lives Matter movement.
You waited on purpose, didn't you?
That's racist. White fly!
So anti-social justice warriors, one of their pet peeves is the Black Lives Matter movement.
Not so much the movement's cause itself as the method and rhetoric with which they seek to achieve their cause and some success with regards to that cause.
Which is a fancier way of saying it's because Martin Luther King was a great leader, whereas Black Lives Matter just breaks shit.
It drives them absolutely crazy. And one of the things I wanted to, well, the thing that I wanted to talk about in this video is the fact that the Martin Luther King civil rights movement has got there are parallels between the Martin Luther King movement and the Black Lives Matter movement.
Do go on. This should be interesting.
Yeah, you know it's gonna be a good video when she's got shittier quality than my first few videos and stutters more than I do.
And that if you hate the Black Lives Matter movement, chances are you probably would have hated Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
And had Martin Luther King broke shit and burned down every city that he went to, then that claim would probably be true.
So here you've made two gargantuan claims right here in the first 37 seconds of your video. Now the two claims that you've made are, 1, there are parallels between MLK civil rights movement and BLM protests. 2, that if you don't support BLM today, you wouldn't have supported MLK's civil rights movement before either. In order to prove both of these, you must have some pretty damning evidence to back up those claims.
So I am going to draw on the arguments of an academic by the name of Dr. Jean Theo Harris, and I will give a link to her article in the description.
Now, I love it when people do this, where they can't formulate their own arguments, so they just regurgitate the talking points of someone else who happens to have a degree in, oh my, poli-sci. A political science major, and from Harvard no less. By gosh diddly me, such impressive very wow.
Yeah, that's just about as annoying as when a YouTuber asks another YouTuber to do a collaboration because he doesn't feel like doing all the Google searching it would take to come up with a valid argument. What are you looking at?
So, here's the article, and it's from The Root. The link to it will be provided for you in the description, as well as the original video.
But first, let us take a look at this website that is The Root. For those of you that haven't seen this beautiful website, it contains wonderful masterpieces of journalism such as Ivanka Trump tweeted about Black History Month, and it didn't go well. Which basically says that Ivanka's not allowed to tweet about Black History Month because her father is Donald Trump. They also write beautiful pieces such as telling old white men that they should not run for president in 2020, and my personal favorite, telling us that air pollution is racist. That air pollution is fucking racist. I'm not making that up. But the icing on the cake would probably be when they decided that Keaton Jones's bullying situation was invalid because he's white and his parents may have been racist.
White tears. This week we're examining why thou shalt relentlessly question white tears. White tears are nothing new, but now we're on to your white fragility. Recently, Keaton Jones became a milkshake duck. Keaton was crying because he was bullied. But then, things took a dark turn, or rather, a white turn, when we got to meet his alleged racist Confederate flag-loving family. I sentenced the world to a drought of white tears. We've had enough. You know what? The entire white community should be re-raised by black women. Problem solved.
So no, I don't think this website's going to be biased at all.
And I'd just like to point out a few of the more important points from it. Across the political spectrum over the last 2 years, as Black Lives Matter burst into national consciousness, many commentators, from former Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, who said that King would be appalled by Black Lives Matter, to Oprah Winfrey, who told young activists to take note of the strategic, peaceful intentions if you want real change, and the Reverend Barbara Reynolds. We were nonviolent activists who won hearts by conveying respectability and changed laws, by delivering a message of love and unity. Have invoked the history of civil rights movement to chastise Black Lives Matter. They, and many others, have cast today's protesters as dangerous and reckless and not living up to the peaceful, respectable, unified legacy of the civil rights movement. Now, before we go on, it should be noted that the Mike Huckabee link used in this article doesn't actually work, so I can't verify a goddamn thing that she says. Further, the link with regards to Reverend Barbara Reynolds takes us to this article by Barbara Reynolds herself, entitled, "I was a civil rights activist in the 1960s, but it's hard for me to get behind Black Lives Matter." In this article, she details her experiences as a civil rights activist during the 1960s under the mentorship of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Quote, "Black Lives Matter is a motley-looking group to this septuagenarian grandmother," I'm so sorry for my pronunciation, "an activist in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Many in my crowd admire the cause and courage of these young activists, but fundamentally disagree with their approach, trained in the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. We were nonviolent activists who won hearts by conveying respectability and changed laws by delivering a message of love and unity. Black Lives Matter seems intent on rejecting our proven methods. This movement is ignoring what our history has taught." Now keep in mind, those are her words, not mine. I'm not the one invoking MLK here. She is. But I will say that Barbara, dear, and her claims are backed up by the very same man whom you have decided to misrepresent in your article, Janine. Quote, "The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral. Begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. So it goes. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." 1967, where do we go from here, chaos or community? So I think we should all keep that little tidbit of information I've provided in mind for when I continue to read Janine's article. These framings misrepresent the movement that BLM activists are building across the country and the history of the civil rights movement. Such historical revisionism is both dangerous and comfortable. Dangerous because it grossly distorts how the civil rights movement actually proceeded, and comfortable because it allows many Americans to keep today's movement at arm's length. So when she says revisionist, and she lumps Barbara into that mix of revisionists, she is revising herself the very same history that Barbara lived. My main issue is not with this author, nor with the myths she is making an effort to dispel. Resume the video. Carry on.
Of the video. So basically, Dr. Theo Harris points out the similarities between. Well, you can draw the similarities from her article between Black Lives Matter and the civil rights movement. So one thing that she points out is that, contrary to popular belief, the Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement was a movement that it had its campaigns.
Okay, pro tip from somebody who also has a stuttering problem. If you're having Exhibit A.
Does not words right?
If you're having trouble making words right, re-record the clip until you can words right.
Consisted of mass civil disobedience. And the whole aim of those campaigns that Martin Luther King organized was to get maximum disruption of businesses and cities.
Oh, this I do not deny. MLK did indeed enact mass civil disobedience. He encouraged it, in fact. We are aware that it works. But to what degree is civil disobedience acceptable? My line, and where I refuse to cross, is into the territory of violence. I will not hit another person for the sake of my cause. I will not demand that their right to speak is inhibited. I will not spew hatred against another group of people or person just because they hate me. That is not the way. And it's not just me who thinks that these tactics work. There are examples throughout history of these tactics also working. Gandhi's Salt March, for instance, in 1930, the man led thousands of Indians 250 miles in protest of a British-imposed salt tax. Because of how violent the British forces became, with the peaceful protesters merely walking, there was a watershed moment throughout international media. There was coverage of the event, and because they did not fight back, the people were sympathized with by the masses, which further strengthened the India independence movement. The Montgomery bus boycott itself, 1955 to 1956, where the black population simply refused to ride public transit. An Alabama court ruled that desegregation was unlawful, and it was a decision that was upheld by the Supreme Court. This was a turning point in history for this movement, and it was not achieved by spewing hateful rhetoric. It was not achieved by assaulting anybody or wrecking a neighborhood. It was just achieved by not doing something. The Singing Revolution, 1986 to 1991, protesters gathered in common areas where they sang songs of national pride, and after 4 years and 14 deaths of protesters, all three countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, gained their independence. That's not to say that peacefulness always works in terms of revolution. It does depend on your circumstances. For instance, I am sure, North Korea would squash those types of protests instantaneously, and the participants would never be seen again. And yes, perhaps bureaucracy, diplomacy, and the judiciary methods take forever to get to the point that you want them to, but it's honestly far better than rushing into something and having a remake of the French Revolution or the Weimar Republican Revolt. Because those did not work out very well, did they? From history, we've learned that from chaos arises men willing to do whatever it is necessary to quell that disorder. And when I say whatever, I mean whatever. Sometimes you may not like the results you land yourself with. And for those of you who are wondering what I mean by chaos, I mean this.
Over the demonstration, our cameras captured protesters throwing several items at officers, glass bottles and rocks, even a metal bar from a nearby construction site. We saw one officer getting help from other law enforcement after he appears to have been injured. In all, 21 officers were hurt.
Stop throwing rocks and bottles at the police officers!
Now, the simple fact of the matter is that when you are shown initiating violence, embracing hatred, and spewing rhetoric that are sentiments most rational people would not associate with, you are no longer cast in a sympathetic light. You become the very thing that you hate, the aggressor, the predator, and the bully, to these other people. I'm sorry, that's just the way perceptions work. You can bitch and moan about it all you want, but that's the way it is, and you have to understand that. this is the only time that I will really say anything good about playing the victim card. I'm simply only saying it out of my knowledge of its use and strategy of playing it. When you are trying to get society to change its views about something, especially in a world where we have complete interconnectedness via the international...
Come on, Weeb, spit it out. I just made fun of her for stuttering. You're making us look bad.
The interwebs. Especially in a world where we live with the internet, you want these people to see your cause as the bullied and the downtrodden one, the individuals in society that are being oppressed. You don't want to be seen as the aggressor or the perpetrator of hateful rhetoric, because it is the cause that is righteous in the face of unspeakable injustice that will motivate the righteously goaded man enough to take up a stance beside you on your mission, because that's what you want, right? Those are who you want by your side, correct? But they will not come to you if they see no right side at which to stand.
Oh shit, she's done. Goddamn, that girl can talk.
So that's one point to be aware of. That contrary to popular belief, Martin Luther King's movement and the civil rights movement of the 60s was one of mass civil disobedience.
Now, I don't know who it is you associate with or what you've been seeing in the news, but you can be rest assured no one worth their salt in history, specifically with regards to U.S. history, would deny that MLK's movement was one that involved mass civil disobedience. I mean, we did learn about the bus boycotts and the sit-ins and the March on Washington, the Freedom Riders and all of that in high school and middle school. That's civil disobedience. These... however, are by no means civil.
So if you've got complaints about Black Lives Matter, would you have supported the civil rights movement of the 60s if that included mass civil disobedience?
And the thing to remember about the Martin Luther King civil rights movement is that he constantly preached non-violence. He was against violence to support their cause. One of the highlights from one of my favorite movies about that time, Selma, Lord Selma, I remember distinctly how often he preached about non-violence, despite the fact that the police and the white citizens of that town invoked 2 riots against them when they were trying to march from Selma to Montgomery. Violence solves nothing. All violence does is make you look like a bunch of thugs that don't deserve any respect.
The issue is not civil disobedience. It is the violence and the hate and the rhetoric that alienates people from your movement. It is the perpetuated sentiment of divisiveness amongst communities, that blacks and whites are pitted against each other, police and blacks are pitted against each other, that we need to play the identity politics game in order to win this. Remember, if you should decide to play the game of identity politics, you should not be surprised that others do not wish to. You can't control people in the way that they think.
The second point that I wanted to make was that Dr. Theo Harris makes in her article is that most Americans were uncomfortable with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement.
Well, that's not something I would totally argue against, because changes make people uncomfortable. But there's a difference in how the civil rights movement made people uncomfortable versus how Black Lives Matter makes people uncomfortable. The civil rights movement made people uncomfortable due to the fact that changes were being made that went against everything they knew about life. Same thing could be said about the LGBT rights movements. However, the reason that Black Lives Matter makes people uncomfortable is we don't really fancy getting robbed, assaulted, or having our property damaged because a bunch of protesters want to start a protest in their neighborhood.
In fact, both Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, who are heroes today, but during the time that they did what they did, they were often called communists and traitors by Americans.
There were hundreds of people imprisoned and thousands who lost their jobs due to the Red Scare. Trust me, the shit was like the plague. No one was safe. Since the two events, like McCarthy era and Civil Rights Movement, shared some overlap of time, there's going to be residual tension. No wonder they were accused of being communists and traitors. But a lot of people were. Why does that matter?
And the third point I wanted to make was related to the second point, and that is that most Americans did not support the civil rights movement of the 60s at that time. So it's a bit like an artist, you know, a lot of artists, their work is appreciated when they're dead. Well, you know, I guess that could be said of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
Close, but no cigar. They weren't popular in the very beginning. No, they weren't. Technically, Rosa Parks was a criminal because she disobeyed the law and didn't move for a white person. And Martin Luther King wanted to change the way of life that most white people knew back in those days. Their popularity, however, did grow over time, because if it didn't, they wouldn't have gotten anything, and we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So yes, they did become popular, but it took a little bit of time. Just because at one point in the civil rights movement they were unpopular, doesn't mean they were unpopular for the whole thing. An unpopular person doesn't get a mass audience in order to give a huge speech in Washington.
Because at the time that they were actively, you know, being activists, they were not that popular. In fact, only 22% of Americans in a Gallup survey of May 1961 actually supported the Freedom Riders.
Now, I actually have the Gallup poll right here. And of the 1,502 people who took part in the poll, 67% of them, 1,007, let's round to be generous, were asked, do you approve or disapprove of what the Freedom Riders are doing? And of these 1,007 people, 22% of the people approved, whereas 61% didn't approve. 18% had no opinion. That's 222, 614, and 181, respectively. But it should be noted that when I looked at this collage of Gallup poll research, it also had this to say. In April 1963, they conducted another survey. Some people feel that in working for equal rights for Negroes, Reverend Martin Luther King is moving too fast. Others think he is not working fast enough. What do you think? 8% said he is moving too fast, 71% said he is moving at the right speed, and 21% said he isn't moving fast enough. And another poll, if there were to be a peaceful parade, march, or picketing here in this town in favor of equal rights for Negroes, would you take part? 72% said yes, 28% said no. May 1964, do you think mass demonstrations by Negroes are more likely to help or more likely to hurt the Negroes' cause for racial equality? 16% help, 74% hurt. 4% makes no difference, 6% no opinion. Further, Gallup poll. October 1964. People have different views about the Negro demonstrations. With which view do you agree? Some people say the Negroes should stop their demonstration now that they have made their point, even though some of their demands have not been met. Others say that they have to continue demonstrating in order to achieve better jobs, better housing, and better schooling. With which view do you agree? 73%. Negroes should stop demonstrations. 19% have to continue. 8% don't know. These Gallup polls and surveys, all of these, in context, paint a different picture because it was taken during 1963, 9 years into the civil rights movement. You also have to remember that the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955 to 1956, had a subsequent bombing, and the Freedom Riders were firebombed and attacked by a mob, for God's sake. The big picture you're missing here is that the civil rights movement was by no means an easy feat. People died. I don't think you understand how much people don't like to hear about death, destruction, and mayhem occurring. To imagine your country, despite its best efforts to remain peaceable, was engaging in a revolution of ideas that cost children their lives. Sometimes people just get sick of it. And you can ask all of the Vietnam protesters why they didn't support the war effort if you want some historical background or what have you. It's interesting that those results were omitted from the article, and by you. I wonder if you ever actually read the polls yourself.
Probably not, considering most of the shit that I've seen on her YouTube and her Twitter is completely uninformed.
By the way, link in the description.
So the point I just wanted to make was that Martin Luther King, who is hailed as a hero today, wasn't very popular in his time.
Now, I don't mean to be the guy who brings Donald Trump meme to a debate, but that turnout is huge. Like, 250,000 people strong. Huge. You don't receive that big a turnout to anything if you're unpopular, specifically at that time. It was actually the largest demonstration ever in the Capitol. Hashtag fun facts with Weeb.
In fact, a lot of the criticisms that anti-social justice warriors have today about the Black Lives Matter movement are very similar to the criticisms maybe their grandparents made of Martin Luther King.
Like what?
So I guess my question is, I mean, if you are against Black Lives Matter, my point is that you probably would be, it follows that you would have been against Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and therefore the logical conclusion is that you would want a reversal of the civil rights movement. The logical conclusion is that you would want a reversal of the civil rights movement.
You would want a reversal of the civil rights movement.
What?
What? What the fuck?
I don't know what the fuck just happened, but I don't really care. I'ma get the fuck up out of here. Fuck this shit, I'm out.
And that you obviously you wouldn't have supported the civil rights movement. You'd like a reversal of it. You want us to go back to the days of Jim Crow, segregation, and lynchings.
Alright, that's it. 0 to 100 real quick. Turn this crazy train around, put it back in the station. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. This is not a drill. I have no drills, only screwdrivers and socket wrenches, and I can't even fix your argument with them.
Calm down, Weebs. Calm down. Breathe. Deep breaths.
I just don't understand.
My question is, am I right?
Let me take a moment to figure this out. And my conclusion is...
No!
And not only do I say no, but Weebo also says...
fuck no, full stop.
And just so you don't have to take just our word for it, a couple of my friends also said...
No, you are very wrong. If you're to pay attention, anti-SJWs advocate for meritocracy. You want to separate people. You want to separate groups by race, by sex, and by class. That is exactly what Jim Crow laws are. It has to be hard being that stupid.
Are you right? Do you hear yourself? Assuming everything you said is true, only one thing follows. Both Martin Luther King and Black Lives Matter are in some sense, or were in some sense, unpopular in the realm of public opinion. The fact that they were both unpopular says nothing with regards to whether either of them were legitimate, or for what reason they were unpopular, or to whom they were unpopular. Might I remind you, it was the Democratic Party that held out the greatest opposition to the civil rights movement for the longest amount of time.
I would just like to say thank you to HeyDude77 for lighting a fire under my ass. And, you should totally go check out his channel. His link will be in the description of this video. Now, if you like my content, please feel free to click the Patreon, Maker Support, Teespring, and Amazon links in the description down below. And if you like my stuff, but maybe not that much, that's cool. No worries. You can always like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. No, not this one. We need the ugly sweater videos. What?
Go. Ooh. Ah. Weebo. At her best. Ooh. Go. Weebo, grandma, in search of grandchildren. She gives hard candies to. OMG. Who is she? Ooh. Ah. Get it. Weebo.